A Flash in the Dark, Chapter 40, Team Up. The night was quiet, no sign of their metahuman, and Cisco had the boomerang well in hand, so Barry went home. She didn't, however, flop down onto her bed like she wanted to. Instead, she decided she would take Felicity's advice. She grabbed the box from one of her chairs, flashing over to her knife block. She grabbed the one she normally used to open packages. She flashed back over to the package and gently cut it open. She peeled the box open and laughed. On top of the box was a new over-the-shoulder bag. Hers had been falling apart when she visited Starling and wasn't faring much better 10 months later. Embroidered at the top of the bag was Barry's name. The bag itself was sturdy and brown and much better quality than her old one. Barry grinned and pulled it out. It would hold everything she needed for work, and the strap wasn't being held together by duct tape. Something glimmered underneath the paper layer in the box. Setting the bag aside, she took off the layer of paper and grinned again, shaking her head. Oliver must have talked to Felicity at some point before ordering this, because a cared-for old copy of the Silmarillion lay there. She'd mentioned that her copy had fallen apart to Felicity, but never to Oliver. She pulled it out, and a note slipped from between the pages. Barry grabbed it and read it quickly. Dear Barry, I hope this finds you well. Felicity made a point to mention that a dress you're apparently not going to wear often was not an appropriate apology for my behavior. So I got you a few things I thought you could actually use. The bag is the best quality I could find on short notice. The book is a first edition from 1977, so be careful with it. And the coffee mug is the same brand I use. I swear nothing I've ever kept in it gets cold. There is something special at the bottom of the box. It's a bit small. Careful not to miss it. Ollie. Barry grinned and tore through the remainder of the paper. She had to put out a smoldering piece before she found what Oliver had mentioned in his note. It was a jewelry box, large enough only for a ring or set of earrings. She opened it and found a pair of earrings in the shape of small arrows, the tips set with emeralds. She snorted, remembering the earrings Bruce Wayne had recently gifted her, and set the box aside and heard something slide around. She frowned and shook the box. It made a noise. Carefully, she pulled the top of the box apart. In a compartment at the bottom was an earpiece. She frowned and turned it over. There was an arrow painted painstakingly on the outside of the earpiece. She laughed and set it into her bedside table under a few things so it was properly hidden. She sighed and flopped down onto her bed. She fell asleep quickly. The next morning, Barry made her way to Jitters, her new coffee mug in hand. She handed it over to Lily and looked around for Iris. She spotted her sister chatting with Felicity and grinning at Oliver. She made her way over to them. Hey, Barry, Oliver said with a grin. Barry grinned and Iris flashed her a look that spoke of retribution and shouting. Barry balked slightly and ducked behind Felicity. What did I do? Barry demanded, shielding her face as her sister pursued her around her friend. Iris shook her head and smiled before she grabbed Barry's arm and dragged her off to the side. Why didn't you tell me Oliver Queen was in town to visit you? She slapped Barry's arm hard, and Barry jerked backward. Ow! I didn't know until last night, Barry pointed out. Iris continued her assault as Barry held up her bag to defend her face as she laughed. Iris finally managed a deep breath. She glanced back at the table where Oliver looked like he was getting a lecture from Felicity. My God, he's so hot. He's on my 3 list, Iris said, waving her hand as if trying to cool herself down. Barry let her bag down. 3 list? Barry asked. Iris nodded, still watching Oliver. The 3 guys I'm allowed to cheat on Eddie with. Normally you don't meet people on your list, but damn! His arms are twice the size of Eddie's, she said with a low whistle. Barry giggled. He's really good, too, she let slip. Iris whirled, fire back in her eyes. Her voice was just above a whisper, but she sounded excited. You slept with Oliver Queen and didn't tell me? She hissed. Barry blushed scarlet and nodded. Iris was about to say something, but her boss called her over to help at the counter before she could ask any further questions. Barry sighed as Oliver stood and made his way over to her. All right, we'll help, he said lowly. Barry had to think for a second before she understood what he meant. Yes, sweet, she said with a grin. Oliver held up a hand. But I am not calling them metahumans, he insisted. Barry rolled her eyes and held out her hand. Partners? Barry offered. It was Oliver's turn to roll his eyes as he shook her hand. Barry had to race off to work, but she got a text from Oliver to meet him after work. With a smile, she went back to testing the samples from the warehouse. Chapter 41, Opinions. Oliver bowed out of jitters shortly after Barry left for work. He needed to know how well she fought, so using Iris's blog as a reference, he took a motorcycle tour of Central City. Though they had all been cleaned up as much as was humanly possible, there were still clues and large skid marks in several places. The mess from the commuter train was still being cleaned up, so Oliver got a closer look at that one than the other sites. Making up his mind, he set off to the abandoned warehouse a little earlier than planned. He had a pit stop to make before he met up with Barry for training. Barry was taking swabs from volunteering victims of yesterday's bank robbery when she heard Eddie arguing with Joe and Captain Singh. She listened as she finished swabbing the inside of the cheek of a young woman holding a baby. Barry smiled at her and bagged and tagged the sample. She directed the woman to Officer Vukovich, who was retaking statements and checking cell phone cameras. Barry leaned on the pillar closest to Captain Singh's office and listened, just catching Eddie saying that the flash was dangerous. Barry rolled her eyes. Iris sidled up to her sister and handed her a coffee. She frowned at Barry's expression. "What's going on, frowny face?" Iris teased. Barry nodded towards the door to Captain Singh's office. "Pretty sure Eddie is trying to convince Captain Singh that the Flash is a public menace." Barry didn't feel too bad about throwing Eddie under that particular bus. After all, Eddie was actually suggesting that she was a menace. Iris's eyes narrowed dangerously. The door opened and she stormed up to her boyfriend, who looked a bit scared when he saw the fire in her eyes. "After weeks of me trying to get you to believe that the Flash is real, now that you do, you're trying to get her arrested?" she demanded, not bothering to keep her voice low. Eddie glanced around to see who had told Iris, and his eyes zeroed in on Barry, who took a sip of the coffee her sister had brought her. "Thanks, Barry." Eddie shot her way sarcastically. Barry grinned slightly behind her cup as she made for the bullpen's exit. "You're welcome." Barry shot back over her shoulder as Iris and Eddie continued their argument. Barry sighed and made her way up to her lab. Joe tapped on her door and glanced around to make sure that there was no one else in the room. "Eddie's making the case against the Flash, yes, but most of what he's basing it on is the Arrow. Serto is still in the hospital. He seems to be back to himself now, but he's going to be out of commission for a while, with the 2 holes in his shoulders," Joe explained. Barry didn't respond, instead tapping a few keys on the keyboard in front of her. "Tell me you got him out of my city, Barry," he demanded. Barry rolled her eyes and continued ignoring her foster father. She flipped open a book by her computer and began to speed read through it. Joe sighed and turned to leave just as Iris entered the room. "Iris!" There was a crash from across the room as Barry fell out of her chair trying to catch the book she'd been reading. She missed and huffed as she began to pull herself up off the floor. Iris gave no indication that she'd seen any faster than normal movement as she chuckled and stooped, picking up the book and flipping it over. She frowned at the title. "Criminal Psychology 102? What's up with that, Bear?" Iris asked. Barry blushed and ignored the hand Joe held out to her to help her up, instead pulling herself up on the table. "I'm expanding my repertoire, Iris. Thinking about going back to school, maybe," she said, shrugging as Iris raised an eyebrow and frowned slightly. "Who got you into psychology, though?" she asked, sounding confused. Barry shrugged. "Caitlin. We talk a lot about her degrees when I'm at Star Labs. She doesn't have a major in psychology, but she took some courses while she was getting her MD. It's actually really interesting." Barry took the book and sidestepped around Joe, once more ignoring his presence as she placed the book down on her desk. Iris's eyebrow climbed higher as her father sighed and took his leave. "What the hell is going on with you two?" Iris demanded, turning back to Barry. Barry sighed. It wasn't as if she could tell Iris that Joe didn't approve of her vigilante ex-lover and friend, even being within the city limits. She settled on a half-truth instead. She was getting rather good at those. "We're having a difference of opinion," Barry deflected. Iris sat down in one of Barry's chairs. "On what?" Barry couldn't think of anything to say, so she decided on the obvious issue. She doubted she could get Iris to stop her blog, especially since it now had her name on it, and was turning out to be more popular than any of them could have predicted. The Flash. Barry said shortly. Iris's frown became more confused. He doesn't agree with Eddie, does he? Iris asked. Barry shook her head. No, I don't think he even thinks the Flash is real, but I think Eddie might have a point. Barry raised her hands. I promised I wouldn't bug you about your blog anymore, but I also don't agree with you. Whoever this Flash is, she's probably just doing this for the attention. What if she snaps? What if she hurts someone? What if someone gets hurt because of her? Because of me? What if I lose the only family I've got? What if one of these days I don't come home? Iris shook her head, looking a bit miffed. You don't know her like I do. I've been talking to her, Barry. She keeps trying to get me to stop writing about her. She keeps saying that it's too dangerous. She's not in this for herself. Iris insisted. Barry sighed. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to argue about this with you, Iris. Barry's phone pinged. She glanced down at it. It was a text from Oliver, asking her where she was. I gotta go. I promised a friend I'd meet up with him. Iris sighed and hugged Barry, the last thing she'd been expecting. I love you, Bear. You're an idiot, but I love you, okay? I don't care if we have a difference of opinion. You're my sister, no matter what. She pointed out. Barry smiled and hugged Iris back. Love you too, Iris. I really do have to go, though, Barry said into her sister's shoulder. All right, but you need to relax at some point. You're starting to worry me. Iris smiled and patted Barry on the shoulder. Barry nodded and headed out to the abandoned warehouse outside of town.